Yesterday, about 13 young men armed with brand new machetes, axes, guns, and charms swooped on the #EndSARS protest in a part of Lagos, attacking protesters, dispossessing them of their phones and other valuables. After initially being taken aback, the protesters reorganized and resisted them. 3 of the attackers were apprehended and handed over to the police before the protest continued. Similar attacks were also reported to have taken place in Abuja. Were the simultaneous attacks on Lagos and Abuja protesters a coordinated attempt to stop the protests? And who could have been behind the attacks? For this and a whole lot more, we're now being joined by Hassan Soweto, a public affairs analyst and national youth leader, Socialist Party of Nigeria. Welcome to the program. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning, Comrade Hassan Soweto. Well,
yes, good morning, sir.
Is it true, as alleged, even by some key members within the EndSARS protest community, that the protest has been hijacked?
That is not true. There is no truth to that. What is true is that given the power of the movement since last Wednesday, given its resilience, the capitalist ruling elite is doing everything it can to try and undermine the movement. And an indication of that is what we saw yesterday in Lagos and Abuja. They are doing everything to undermine the movement, to attack it, and to throw the youth into disarray. And that's why it's important, to continue to urge the young people that at the period when the state is trying to scatter the movement, that is the period when the movement itself should get more organized in order to be able to resist these new measures that the state is putting up.
No, you don't seem to get my question because I hadn't even finished. I was going to define the nature of that hijack. On one hand, you have some members of the movement. I can name names if you want me to because they wrote out there in the public domain. They are alleging that some members of the group have been meeting with people in Abuja and that money is exchanging hands. In fact, one of them said some people have commercialized the protest. The other leg of it is the one you referred to, about the attack on protesters in Lagos and in Abuja. But is it really established that it is the state sponsoring that attack? Is it possible that these are just youths who do not believe in your own ideals and who are trying to stop you from doing what you are doing?
It's very possible because if you look at our experience historically, over the decades and centuries, every ruling elite, when it's cornered, often resorts to this kind of measures of violence in order to roll back a movement. We saw recently, even in the United States, the most advanced capitalist society, if you want to call it that, we saw the far right, the white supremacists, who received the blessing of President Trump while attacking Black Lives Matter protesters. So that what we saw yesterday in Nigeria is a very clear indication that the capitalist elite in Nigeria also realizes that the police and the army currently cannot be relied upon yet, to attack the protesters, especially given the mood in the country. So what they are trying to do is to put out those young people, those boys, arm them in order to cause disarray. What they actually want to create is a situation whereby the news yesterday evening will be that it was the protesters that turned on themselves. But where luck ran out of them was that the protesters were able to apprehend a number of them in Lagos, and as well as in Abuja, so that the story they wanted to sell to the media later in the day could not fly. But even today, I've had reports, just as I got to the studio, that something similar is happening at Alausa now. That some of those youths that were sent yesterday, a bigger section of them have been mobilized again this morning, armed with machetes, brand new machetes, brand new axes, in order to further cause violence within the movement. But what all of this means, really, for me, is the need for the movement to get organized. And this is where I will link up with the first question you asked about the fact that even behind the movement, there are questions about individuals who are meeting with the government, and you cannot say they represent anybody. And I think that that is an indication that If the movement does not get itself organized, then it's likely going to get to a situation whereby those who do not represent it truly are those who are going to do deals behind it with the government. There is a sense in which the youth are right when they say we don't want leaders. Because given the experience of the failure and the betrayal of the leadership of the labor movement, given the betrayal of several so-called activists and revolutionaries who have jumped ship and joined the ranks of the ruling elite, there is a sense in which the youth are right when they say we don't want leaders because they don't want those who will come in order to shipwreck their movement. But what I will tell the youth is that if you don't want leaders to come and shipwreck your movement, what you should do is to choose leaders from among yourself. Because without doing that, you do not give your movement a direction. You do not give it a coherence. And it is that coherence that we need now. We need people that are recognizable, that are elected by the protesters themselves in a committee to continue to give guidance to the movement. That's what can ensure that the movement is able to deal with the kind of situation that we saw yesterday and that we are seeing this morning, with the attempt by the ruling elite to sponsor armed talks in order to undermine it.
This is an extremely grave situation because the last time I heard of the state providing brand new machetes to people was to the Hutus in the lead up to the Rwandan genocide. Not that I'm confirming your claim, but if this is your allegation, it's a very serious one. Now, what you have just said brings to mind the words of the Zimbabwean labor leader, Benjamin Burumbo. He said that when he's fighting for African rights, he uses one hand because the other hand is busy fighting Africans who are fighting him. Let's talk about that the fact that it might not actually be the state, that there really is a voice of dissent among the youth. Some people are quite wedded to the status quo and disagree very strongly with this sudden protest that's happening, this youth awakening. They're actually doing their best to stop it in their tracks. What would you say to those people?
So to which people? Sorry, please.
People amongst the Nigerian youth, not necessarily state-sponsored, who genuinely feel that this protest should stop.
Well, what I would tell them is that they need to consider what the protesters at the barricades are saying. What those protesters at the barricades are saying is that we cannot trust this government. This government has made countless promises in the past, which it didn't keep. So we want to begin to see indications on the ground that some of those demands that were met on Monday, that government actually is interested in implementing them. Then they are also saying that our movement has become so powerful that it has compelled the government to end SARS. But if this movement does not go beyond SARS and we go back from the streets and we go back to our normal miserable life as young people with no jobs, with electricity tariff going through the roof, fuel price going through the roof, then it's like we have not achieved anything. So you have the youth saying that they want their movement to achieve far more than this. And that's why they are still on the street. So what I would tell those people who think that the movement should go back is to challenge them, that for the first time in this country, they also should come out and join those who are on the street in order to ensure that the government is compelled to meet all of the demands that are coming up by the day. Because these demands are expanding. It has gone beyond NSAS. Yesterday, at the protest in Lagos, the dominant demand and chant was that the Inspector General of Police should be sacked. And for good reason, because for most people, you can't be the high gear of police under whose watch for the past 8 days, you have had serious attacks, on protesters, including killings in Lagos, killings in Oyo State. And you continue to remain on that job, telling us that you want to reform SARS. People are saying that they do not want that. Then protesters are also saying that the new unit, the new squad that is being brought up, SWAT, is more or less like a renaming of SARS. And that before you know it, we are going to have SWAT committing the same human rights abuse, as that SARS has been committing. So those are the demands that the protesters are still putting forward, which is why they are still on the street. And I think that those demands are legitimate, and every right-thinking Nigerian ought to support them. But most importantly, is also to call on the workers. And I think this is important, because the parents of those youths who are at the barricades today are workers who are going to work every day, while their children are out there at the barricades facing police bullets. I think that Nigerian workers need to come out, need to take a decision, whether their leadership wants it or not, to support the protesters at the barricades. A 48-hour general strike from Nigerian workers would strengthen the movement of the youth and could ensure that the state, the government, quickly meet all of the demands that the youth are putting up, and that will save all of us a whole lot of stress.
Okay, Hassan Soweto, I want to talk about leadership, because when you look at the history of strikes in Nigeria and protests, it's not today that we've had a leadership crisis. If you remember, historically, 45-46 strike, the 52-day strike, the leadership of Labour then balked, and it took the willingness of a man called Michael Imodu, with just primary school education, to rally the protest, to be a leader onto the protest, while other members of the Labour then balked and left Michael Imodu to his fate. And that lasted 52 days, and that repealed what was known as COLA back in the days, during the British colonialist governments. How can these people, these young people, get a leader? Should the leader comprise of the feminist coalition that has been doing the logistics of protests, or it should comprise of the likes of celebrities, because some people are going to be fighting that those celebrities are going to the back to collect money, or it should be Aisha Yesufu? How can they get a leader? Because at some point, people say, okay, Davido went to see, or should it be Naira Marley, Davido, that has interfaced with the IG and the likes? How can they get a leader? What should be the process of getting that leadership by now?
The process is very clear, because we have had examples in history. The Occupy movement of 2011, despite all of its limitations, showed to us an example of people's democracy, participatory democracy. Leadership committees were chosen from the assemblies of the Occupy movement, composed of people chosen, elected right from the protest ground, and trusted by the protesters. That's the kind of example that I think that the youth who are out today should also try and emulate. Right from the protest ground, there's a need for congresses to hold where committees on different aspects of the struggle can be elected. Committee of 7, committee of 15, to attend to different issues concerning the protest. For instance, given the relentless attacks by thugs that we see today, one of the things that the protester could do is to have a self-defense committee, which is not armed really, but that can form a wall around protesters when they are marching, in order to ensure that anybody from outside who is not a protester is not able to gain access into the midst of the movement. Because what we must also guide against the institution whereby the state will send adjourned provocateurs into the midst of the protesters in order to do something that can invite police violence and repression. So, but if you have this kind of self-defense committees elected democratically from among the protesters and composed of people that can be trusted, that can ensure that, we are able to make some of these undermining of measures to undermine the protest to become impossible. You need a welfare committee. You need a committee on finance. Yes, the way the finance has been managed has been very good. It's been very impressive. But as the movement grows, so also should be the measures of organization. Because accountability for the movement becomes important. For every penny donated, you need a finance committee that can ensure that there's an oversight on how the money is being spent. And this committee, they don't have to have a long tenure. To start with, they could have a tenure of 48 hours or a week, after which the committee is re-elected, so that the members of the committee can either be returned if they have done well over the past 1 week, or a new membership and a new committee is thrown up. These are the ways through which the movement can begin to put up a leadership for itself, a leadership that I can trust, so that when it comes to dealing with the government, you are going to have people that have been directly elected by the protesters to represent them at such talks. And to be expected that whatever they discuss with the government will be a product of the mandate given to them by the protest movement, and they are not going to agree to anything with the government until they have returned back to the assembly of the protesters to present these issues before the protesters and to receive a mandate whether to agree or not. That is the way to go for the movement, in order for it to strengthen itself, to become more resilient, and to survive the current measures, to put it in disarray. And most importantly, like I said again, the working class needs to enter battle, so that with this movement, we can open up the high road towards a socialist revolution in Nigeria, which I think is what is required to actually ensure that the country is returned back into the hands of the people, with the working class in the leadership of society, and ensuring that the enormous wealth and resources that this country has actually goes to benefit the mass majority. That has to be the goal and the final aim of this very impressive movement that we have seen since last week.
Well, Comrade Soweto, two quick things and then a question for you. In the first place, you may be placing too much faith in the Nigeria Labour Congress. I guess you are referring to the NLC when you said, organized labor should step forward. We had a guest on this program who made it clear to us that the Nigerian Labour Congress does not exist to be taking up every issue in the country. Whoever is interested in any particular issue can go and organize themselves and pursue those issues. He made it clear that the NLC, as presently constituted, is strictly interested in the Nigerian worker and members of their families. That's one. The second point about leadership. I know there are strategies and tactics about how you organize a revolution. But this time around, the average person out there is saying that they don't want any leaders. Some leaders had emerged in the past. Aisha Yusufu, Showore, Shegun Awosonya, who even started the process of this NSAS, the whole drama in 2017. In fact, he himself is now saying that he doesn't approve of some of the methods being adopted now. So you may run into a very serious contradictions there. But now the question. Now, there is something that is circulating about the true meaning of SARS, of NSAS. It says E, education and economic reform. N, Nigerian constitution reform. G, debt accountability. S, security reform. A, anti-people policies cancellation. R, restructuring. S, save cost of governance. Now, these are governance issues. Yeah. These are reform issues. Yeah. They can only come about through a process. It's not something government can do in 1 week. It's not government can do in 2 weeks. But some people say the federal government of Nigeria has already demonstrated good faith. It has disbanded SARS. It has created SWAT, whether you agree with it or not. It looks willing to engage in a dialogue. That shouldn't the youth at least suspend the protests and at least give government a little time to give effect to the promises it has made and also to some of the steps it has taken. That, by the way, is the position of the governor of Lagos State, and he still expressed it yesterday. What do you think?
Well, what I think is that the government has completely misread the mood of the youth and the mood of the nation. What the government does not know is that the End SARS slogan is just the immediate cause of this movement. The remote cause or causes is a complete frustration of average Nigerian youth and the mass majority of the working people and poor about the complete dysfunctionality of this system, the inequality that is rising by the day, the high cost of living. That is what is driving this. So if you want to understand why people do not seem to want to go off the streets, despite some of the concessions that have been granted, that's the only way to begin to understand it. Then secondly, when you look at the concessions that have been granted, they are like a scratch on the surface of the problem. What the government is saying is that you want to replace one elite unit, which has gone rogue, with another that is also likely to go rogue. SWAT is going to be an heavily weaponized unit, you know. And then the question is that, why do we need such kind of elite force, either in the police or in the army? It is simply because Nigeria is an unequal society where more people are hungry and have no opportunities. And that is how crime festers. What protesters insistently want is a society where nobody has to be using gun to patrol the street before all of us can live peacefully. And what does that require? It is for the resources of this country to be utilized to make the lives of everybody better. Nobody would have to start stealing before they survive. And that's how you can ensure that policing becomes a civil process through which a committee of uniformed men, elected by the community, patrols the street for the purpose of just maintaining civil order. Not the kind that we have in Nigerian neo-colonial system, whereby you have police on the street with guns, with weapons, and yet crime and criminality manifest and thrives on a daily basis. So for me, I think that the government continues to mistreat the mood of the youth. And that is why everything is put forward, it scratches the surface of the problem. If the government can make some far-reaching concessions on economic issues, for instance, on the issue of fuel price, on the issue of electricity tariff, on the issue of jobs, on the issue of minimum wage, which is not being paid in many places. What about unemployment benefits? These are the kind of things that if the government is talking about, perhaps protesters might be interested in discussing with the government about those issues. But if what they are saying is replacing SARS with SWOT, I don't think that this protest would buy that. Because for many people, it just scratches the surface of their problem, doesn't address it at all.
Well, thank you very much, Comrade Hassan Soweto, for joining us on the morning show.